Hi, I'm Woody and welcome to Woody Minis. Today we are building an Overgrown Dreadnought. Let's get started. All the pieces used in this build were made of resin, so it was important for me to clean off all that mold release agent with soapy water, because otherwise the glue and the paint won't stick to it and we'll be left with a dodgy looking model. Well, we might be left with a dodgy looking model anyway, but that's just how it goes. Whilst all the pieces of the miniature were drying, I took out my AK acrylic texture paste, which is getting a bit past its, use by date. And I want to, not waste it. So I ended up just slapping a whole lot onto the base, and because it's almost dry, it holds its shape really nicely, looking like earth, rocks, and a little hilly outcropping. Using a little sculpting tool for this was perfect, as it's so easy to clean with just a paper towel. Whilst waiting for the texture base to dry, I could start testing the model itself by just assembling it in blue tack first, just to play around with the poses and find something I like. I eventually settled on this one. It looks like he's bellowing out through the forest, calling out a challenge with his arms out to his side. To increase the contact zone between the feet and the base, I added a little bit of green stuff to the bottom of his feet. This will make sure that he sticks on nicely with the glue and won't fall apart so easily. Afterwards, I just used super glue to start assembling the legs first, building from the bottom up. These legs joints fit in pretty easily, just make sure to get the glue onto the axles. After that, the hip joint was a bit tricky and it did require me to hold it in place a long time for a solid bond to form, but he was looking pretty solid. And whilst it is a pain to use resin, the Forgeworld kits are absolutely beautiful. This Dreadnought chassis is actually from the Raven Guard 30k range, and I just love how the patterns and details on the armor make it so unique, as well as all the skulls and bird themed pieces that really will help it fit in with my Woodstodes army theme. The whole kit is pretty expensive, so I bought a 3D printed melter gun for his arms, and to make it a bit more custodian, I also glued on some of these pieces that I had spare from the Achilles Dreadnought kit bash I did. I did find a really cool Contemptor Power Claw armor on eBay, which I quickly snapped up. It was a pain in the butt to assemble though. As every joint has so much movement, I had to hold on the shoulder in place with my finger, whilst gluing on the wrist of the Dreadnought. And the Dreadnoughts do come with a couple of options for their weapons, but the Custodes ones only get one, a little bolter inside the Power Fist, which I assembled here. The trickiest part was all these little claws, but luckily if you take a look, some sides have a nut and bolt are visible, the others are just smooth, so this kind of tells you where it needs to go. And this one, it goes right here. And I really love these talons because it just makes the Dreadnoughts look so much more unique, and it fits in well with often the bird and eagle themes that the Custodes Guard have. Not to mention, Dreadnoughts normally have such fat fingers. I mean, the claws would surely help with all sorts of tasks. The arm was nearly complete, but the elbow guard did need a little bit of trimming so that it would fit snug inside the joint, with just a little bit of super glue here. With the arms and sub-assemblies complete, I was able to just stick them on and get the overall build looking exactly how I wanted it. The big boy wasn't quite custodian enough, so I dug through my bits box to find any old pieces I had, and found a whole selection of joint guards that I attached to his legs. The build was complete. I primed the miniature with an underside of black paint, and then gave it a xenophore highlight of white at the top with a 45-degree angle and rotating him around. Now, before I moved on to painting, I couldn't find a good painting handle until, oh yes, the AK Terrain Light Earth. Absolutely perfect. Using a bit of tack, I stuck him on and gave him the traditional shake test. And yep, he's a pretty solid boy. A bit nerve-wracking, but you got to do it. We'll be using a lot of contrast paints for the paint job, Skeleton Horde and Guilliman Flesh in abundance, and 2 paintbrushes, one nice, one not so nice. Start off by just base coating armor panels in the Skeleton Horde Guilliman Flesh 50-50 mix, and when it's done we're going to go swap our paintbrushes and start removing some off with a little bit of light stippling. This is going to leave streaks because my army has a marble armor theme, which I intensely regret doing as it takes just far too long to paint. After we've got lots of splotches and patterns, these will guide our brush strokes later. And here's the first layer over the whole model. It's now time to pick up a fine paintbrush and just add some little streaks of marble. I'm using a reference photo just out of sight on my computer screen, and this really helps with showing and guiding your hands with how the marble flows and the veins that move through it. Once this pattern has dried, you can get a diluted mix and add it over the top to add a nice little gradient. And if it's a bit too much and it doesn't look quite how you want it, you just go back with that damp paintbrush and wick away the excess, like so. And this is a really ridiculously time-consuming process, so if anyone has a better way of painting marble for little pieces, please let me know. Please. And maybe about 30 minutes later, I was left with this. Now he's got all his marble patterns and he's starting to look pretty nice. But he does look a bit plain, so we're going to go through with some Balthazar gold, and mine is looking a bit worse for wear, but I mean, I can't be bothered going to the shop after doing all that. For the gold, I'm just going to add it to all of these details and patterns on his armour. Something to really make him pop and add a bit more contrast to the paint job, while still keeping in with the theme. There's also some decorations, eagles and imperial symbols on him that really I want to draw attention to. And gold, of course, grabs people's attention quite nicely. For some other metallic details, I just used some lead belcher, mainly on the melter gun barrels and on the chimney pipes of his power pack. And it wouldn't be a classic paint job without Nuln Oil all over the metallic pieces. I'm really carefully avoiding getting this onto the marble, as it will just make it look a bit crap, as I've, spilled this before. With all of these base layers done, it's time to add a little bit of OSL to his melter gun and his chimney pipes. I'm just using some slightly diluted white from Games Workshop Citadel range and gently dotting it in. The dilution really helps it flow into the recesses without too much effort. And if there's any overspill, a just quick wipe with the finger will take it off easy enough. Now to hunt for the right type of green, and is it? Yeah, that looks about right. And you can tell I've not been painting for a while. I just add the contrast paint into these little recesses and it creates a nice green glow, something that fits in with my army's forest theme. And it especially works well on areas like the back of his power pack where we've got this metal grid. It's really easy for the contrast paint to flow down into them and to create a nice glowy effect, and the transparency allows you to get a bit of overspill on it that kind of looks a bit like a glow. It did need a bit of tidying up in the end by adding some white directly to the centre. And when that was finished, it's now time to work on all that overgrowth using this stuff. Tree moss powder, which is just green coloured sponge. It's easier to apply this with tweezers by first dipping it into some clear glue and then sticking it on. Once it's on, it will be a bit too bulky, so just get the tweezers again and pull them off until you're left with, something that you like the look of, some sort of moss or lichen or little plant growth popping out of areas. It's a pretty time-consuming process, so I've just sped it up for you so we can move on to the next bit of overgrowth. And to be honest, I bought all these things on Temu, so I have no idea what they're called, but this is just like long, stringy string which has been folded and coiled a bit into tree-like patterns. It looks a lot like vines, but it needed a bit of a twist into some sort of rope-like structure before I could use it properly. If you do know the name of what this is called in English, please just comment it below so I can find some different things. I used this to wrap around the wrist as it was looking a bit plain, and I wanted it to look like, draw a bit of attention to the weapon because to be honest, these claws just look way too cool. And I found it really easy to use some quick drying super glue to stick this on, and then just put a dot on when I thought it was finished, and trim off the excess with a pair of, safe scissors. The next part of the model to get the springy, stringy, planty treatment was this rope that attaches the chains and imperial insignias to his chest. And after that, I just stuck on some basing materials to his shoulder pad, give it a bit of a different colour tone, before moving on to some other types of lichen using just some PVA glue. I dab on the PVA glue with my old terrible brush on areas where I think lichen or moss would grow. Once I finished all these little areas, I then just doused the whole thing in tree flock or grass powder, whichever you want to call it. I push my finger onto it at the end just to make sure it's stuck in the glue properly, otherwise it tends to fall off. It is a bit too bright though, so I tend to darken it down with some Bealtan green shade, just going over all of these areas. It also kind of sinks into the recesses a little bit more, so you kind of get all these little grass tufts highlighted as well. It took a while to dry, so I just finished off the base with some, simple basing materials, not too much to say here, and it was then time for a grand reveal. I am really happy with how this guy turned out, and I will be sharing the rest of my army next week with a new video. It's not finished yet, but I want to move on to some other projects in the meantime because I am sick of spending hours of my week painting marble. So I will see you then. Don't forget to like and subscribe.